Hi, welcome to the last week of our Broken Road Quilt Along. I hope you've been able to keep up, but if not, I will link to all the prior videos below and also my photo tutorial blog posts in case you want to read them or watch them to catch up. If you haven't started at all, I will place a link below that will allow you to sign up for a special newsletter, which gets you a discount code in my shop where you can purchase one or both of the Broken Road patterns. Just for those just joining us, I have two Broken Road patterns. One that features the smaller sizes, wall and baby. One that features the larger sizes, up to queen. So pick the one that you want and get to it. You still have some time to enter for prizes, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Anyway, this will be our last video for the Quilt Along. So I want to thank everyone that has been quilting along and has joined in on the fun. It's been fun to see all the different colorways and everything popping up all over the internet. Today we're going to focus on putting our blocks together and making the quilt top. There are some variations between the two patterns, so I'll discuss those a little bit later when we get to adding borders. First, up to this point, you have sewn your units and you've sewn them into blocks. So before we start to sew them into a quilt top, the most important thing you need to do is press your blocks well and measure them and make sure they are the correct size. If needed, you might need to re-sew, you might need to trim just a tiny bit, you might need to press better in order to get them to be the right size. But once you have them the right size, it's time to sew them together. Here's our quilt block, and you need to make as many of these as the pattern indicates for the size quilt that you're making. Then just put them up on your design wall in rows, and you'll want to make sure that you rotate the block as needed to form these stars. So follow the pattern follow the layout in the quilt pattern, and it will tell you how to lay out your blocks. Go ahead and get that off. Once you have all your blocks laid out in the proper order, you simply sew them together in rows. Now, when I sew my rows together, I press the seams between each of the blocks open. However, you can press them in one single direction if you want to press to the side. So what I do if I'm doing that is I will press all the blocks in the first row to the right, and then all the blocks in the second row to the left, to the right, and then to the left, and so on. That way, when I sew the rows together, I have opposing seams. So that's what you're trying to do. And notice that there are a lot of seams here. So as I'm sewing, say, these two blocks together, they'll be laid out like that. I will flip them one on top of the other, and then I will pin these seams. If I've got open seams like me, I just make sure that the seam itself is matched up, and then I'll pin here because that is the seam that when you're sewing, this seam here is the one that will be flipped underneath by the feed dogs. So if you pin that, it won't get flipped and it'll stay where it needs to be. So I always pin this topmost seam allowance. Now, if you're pressing to the side, then what you'll have is seams that go one direction like that and another direction like that. And then they butt together. So that is what you're looking for. And then again, you'll want to pin this seam, so that, because that's the leading seam, the one closest to the feed dogs as you're feeding the seam through the sewing machine to sew it. So make sure you're pinning at all of the intersections, and there's a lot of them, but you know, that's how you get them to match. And then sew your rows, and then press, again, either pressing the seams open between each block or in opposing directions for each row. Then you sew the rows together. At that point, you have the quilt center done. Now it's time to add the borders. If you've ever had an issue with your borders kind of rippling a little bit, that is because your seam allowance isn't perfect, and well, you know, whose is every single time. And you are adding a border that's either too large or too small when compared to the quilt center. So the way you fix that so you don't have ripply borders is you adjust your borders so that they are the same size or the average size of the quilt center. So this is what you do. For this one, you're going to add the side borders first, and there's this little tiny inner border, and that's border number 1. It happens to match the background, but in your case it could be a completely different color if that's what you want. I sew all of these border strips together first into one big, gigantic, long border strip, almost like I'm sewing binding together. Then I take measurements. I measure the quilt center down in a couple of places, and I find the average. And then I cut my 2 side borders to be that average, and then I sew them on. For the top and bottom borders, I repeat the same process, except this time I'm measuring across the quilt. And I measure in 2 or 3 places, because you'll notice that it will vary a little bit. Even if you're fairly perfect with your 1/4 inch, it might vary like an eighth. It might vary as much as a 1/4 of an inch. So you just need to take that into consideration, find an average, cut your borders to be that average, and then sew them to the top and bottom. Now when adding your borders, border 1, I tend to press away from the quilt center and towards border 1. That's what I do, or I press open. Now for the larger size, you're going to be adding a second border, which is similar to the inner border. In other words, it's not pieced, it's just a plain border. I chose this fabric from the collection for this quilt. You can choose whatever one you want. And then again, you do the same process. You cut your borders, you sew them all together, you measure down the quilt in several places, find an average, cut your side borders to be that average size, pin carefully, and sew them to the sides. And you do the same thing for the top and bottom. Again, measuring across the quilt in several places to come up with an average, making your top and bottom borders cut to that average size, and then you sew them to the top and the bottom. Again, I'm pressing towards that outer border, but you can press towards the inner border and just have all your seams be on that tiny little border if that's what you want. Or you can press open. So that's how I add my borders if I'm making the larger top. If I'm making the smaller top, you'll notice that it's pieced. It's a pieced border. So that gets a little bit more complicated for people, because for a pieced border to fit exactly, you have to have a perfect 1/4 inch throughout your quilt top. When you're adding borders, that inner border has to be perfect, perfect, perfect. The reality is that it might not be perfect. When you piece your squares together here, it might not come out to be exactly the size of your quilt top, your quilt center. So step 1 is first, you gather the squares, the size squares that it says to use in the pattern, and you sew as many as it says together to create a side border, 2 different side borders. And what I did literally is I just laid the squares out on my design wall and moved them around so that it would be scrappy and kind of pretty, and there wouldn't be like 2 bright greens right next to each other or whatever. So you can be fiddly like that if you want to, or you can just randomly sew some squares together. Make sure you sew the number of squares that it says to do in the pattern. Then you should press the squares well and measure how long those side borders are. and then also do your average measurement of the quilt center. If there's a difference, then adjust your pieced borders. For example, if my average was, I'm just going to pull a number out of my head, 32 3/4, and my pieced border was 32 1/2, then I might need to take a couple of tinier seams between a few of the blocks in order to make my pieced border bigger, because it was a little bit small. Most likely your piece border is going to be bigger than your quilt center. So let's say my quilt center was 32 3/8, and my piece border came out to be 32 1/2. So it's too big. At that point, I want to take a couple of larger seam allowances to shrink my pieced border to be that average size. And you just randomly select a couple of intersections here, a couple of seams that you want to re-sew, and keep pressing and then checking until it's the right size. That's when you can sew it on and it won't ripple. So do that for the sides, and then for the top, you just repeat the process. You sew your squares together, you measure across the quilt at several places to find the average, and then you adjust your pieced border as needed by press well first, because a lot of times that's the issue. But if you pressed well and there's still just a tiny bit of variance, find a couple of innocuous seams and just make a slight adjustment to make that border the correct size, and then pin it and sew it to the quilt, and you will have your final border sewn on, and you'll be done with your quilt top. So that's the difference between the two. One has a pieced border, one does not. You don't have to have a pieced border if you don't feel like it, but you'll have to purchase some extra fabric in order to have a plain border if you're doing the mini. So that's it, and that's how you piece together your quilt top. So let's take a look at how you might quilt your quilt. For this one, the larger quilt, I decided to send it out to a long armor. This was red, white, and blue, so I chose something that was kind of patriotic for the quilting. As you can see, there's stars and then nice swirls. It kind of waves almost like a flag down the quilt, and that's what I chose to do. That doesn't mean that you have to send your quilt out to a long armor in order to get it quilted. There's a very simple way to quilt Broken Road that is completely doable on your home machine. Let me show you. We take a look at this one. This is the mini, but again, you could do this with the larger size. What I did was I quilted along these rows of triangles, and I quilted a small circle. So I just very gently with my walking foot kind of pointed an arc, and then I was aiming for this intersection, and then I would point an arc, swing it to this intersection, and then slight swing to that intersection, and then slight to that one, all the way down the row till I got to the end. And then without stopping, I started going up this row, and then I headed up this row. Eventually I did all of the triangles. That left the stars. So what I did with the stars is, if you can see, I used the edge of my walking foot against this as a guide. So I sewed whatever that is, 3/8 of an inch or something, from the edge here, and then here, and then here, here. So I just kept sewing using this edge, this outer edge, as my guide. And that's all I did with the quilt stars. Now with the larger size, you might want to quilt a little bit further out, but still that should be enough quilting. Or you could put something in the center. You could do a diamond kind of square shape in the center. to add more quilting if you wanted to. But that's something you can do without marking, and you can do it with a walking foot, and you can do it on your home machine. So that is a very simple way to quilt it. To finish the outer edge, I simply did a kind of a in the ditch right here along the border, and then I did another in the ditch here. I decided I wanted to add something to the outer border, but I didn't have to because these are so small. But I did free motion quilting. I did kind of a little thing like that. And let's see, did a little like that, and then did this, and then that, and then did this, and on. So I think you can see it with that pretty well. But I'm just stitching, like I stitch a circle, come back, stitch it in the other direction, come back, stitch in this direction, come back, and then stitch that direction, come back. So it's just a very simple loop that I like. I wonder if you can see it better on the back. Probably not, because I matched my thread pretty well. But there you go. And I don't know if you can really see the quilting on the back there, but anyway, so those are some quilting ideas. As you get your top quilted, please share it on social media, because we'd all like to be inspired not only by the fabrics that you've chosen, but also the quilting design that you've used. Now let's talk about prizes and how to enter for prizes. Beginning today, you can enter on my website, and I will place a link below in the video description so that you can jump over there and enter. You need to upload a photo to something that's called a linky or a link up. And if you have any trouble at all, there is a page on my website that steps you through the process. Or you can also email me the photo at jennifer.fulton@inquiringquilter.com, and I will put it in the link up for you if you're having that much trouble. You have until August 7th to enter. You can enter a photo of your quilt top, or you can enter a photo of your finished quilt. If you enter a photo of the quilt top, you'll get one chance to win one of the prizes, and there's 3, and I will get to those in just a second. If you enter your quilt top, you'll get 2 chances to win. So a little bit of motivation there to actually get your quilt top finished, but if you don't worry about it. I mean, to get your quilt finished, because you get 2 chances for a finished quilt. But don't worry about it. You still get a chance to win if you just get your top finished. And again, you have until midnight, August 7th, to link up on my website a photo of your quilt top or your finished quilt for chances to win. Now let's talk about what you're going to win. First place is this lovely fat quarter collection from Reflections, an entire fat quarter collection. Can you imagine? Plus, you get all of the patterns that I have designed for Reflections. So you not only get fabric, you also get the patterns that you need to use that fabric to make something. Obviously, you have already purchased Broken Road. You may have purchased both, and that was part of the price. So if whichever patterns you don't already have, you can substitute a different pattern from my quilt shop so that you will end up with a complete pattern pack. For prize number 2, you will win a Fat Eighth collection from Reflections. So an entire Fat Eighth, that's 20 Fat Eighths from Reflections, and you'll get your choice of one pattern that I designed for the Reflections collection. So you get to choose which pattern you would like to use with your Fat Eighths. If you don't win prize number 1 or prize number 2, you might win prize number 3. And prize number 3, what I've done is I've made a lot of quilts with Reflections, obviously. And so I have a lot of leftover scraps, and those scraps range from small, about 2 inches or so, up to almost a fat eighth. So there's lots of little bits of scraps, and one lucky winner will win that bag of scraps. As much as I can stuff into a bag, it will be what you'll get. And I hope you enjoy that. If you're a scrappy lover like me, it's a pretty good prize. So those are the prizes that you can win if you enter your quilt top or your finished quilt. So now all I can say is get sewing. and also please post your progress as you're working to make your blocks, as you're sewing your stuff together, as you're finishing your quilt top and or quilt. Please post them on social media with the hashtag, and this means you just put it in the text of the post, #Broken Road QAL. And then in order to kind of tag me or alert me that you put a post on social media, you add in the text @Inquiring Quilter, and that way I'll know that you posted. So please post to the link up. By the way, you post to the link up on my blog, and that gets you a chance, or 2 chances if it's quilt top. You can earn an extra chance by posting on social media your finished quilt or quilt top, but you have to tag me with the @Inquiring Quilter, and you'll know that I've seen your post and that I'm counting it if I like it and comment. So if I comment on your post, then you know it's golden and I've seen it. If not, then just reach out via email and let me know about it. And I'm happy to include it as an extra chance for you. I just need to see it first. So thank you very much for quilting along. Thank you for supporting my very first collection with Isla Batik. I will have another collection coming out in the fall, so I'm a busy girl. And I will have another quilt along, so I hope you will join me for all the festivities. I'll have lots of giveaways and things prior to the quilt along, so make sure you follow me, subscribe to my email if you want to. When you visit my website, a little pop-up will come up so that it's easy to subscribe, but I will have a link below that will tell you how to add yourself to my newsletter. And you'll be among the first people that get to see my new collection when it comes out in the fall. So I hope you will join me then, and I hope you will join me now and finish your quilt, and let's see what all these beauties look like. So I'll see you online, and on August 8th on my website, and then also on social media, I will announce the 3 winners. So again, you have till midnight, August 7th, to get your entries in, and August 8th, I'll announce the new winners. What am I saying? There's going to be 3. When I make the announcement, you'll have a limited time to contact me and provide your postal information. That's to say that you're accepting the prize. If you, so make sure you're watching your emails and also your social media during that period of time from August 8th on to see if you've won, because you have a limited time to let me know that you won the prize. And if you don't do that, then I'll have to pick somebody else. So that's why I'm saying watch out. And the easiest way to do that is make sure you follow me. See you later. All the links for everything that I've talked about in the video are below. So use those and get hooked up to follow me and enjoy my next collection. And again, thank you very much for supporting Reflections. I've really enjoyed this. Bye now.